On today's episode of Life's Potluck Buffet, I kind of want to sketch out a possible treatment for a streaming show that we're all going to watch all the episodes of because it's going to be really good just thinking about it. And I got the idea from thinking about the history of some really cool musical instruments and the styles surrounding them. And so on today's episode of Life's Potluck Buffet, I'm going to talk about those instruments. And I am also going to kind of think out loud about what this show would look like because I think it might be a really, really good show if anybody out there is listening. I'm John Paulus. You're listening to Life's Potluck Buffet only on YouTube. If you've been enjoying Life's Potluck Buffet, please subscribe. And if you've already subscribed, thank you for subscribing. And if you have a Brave browser, you can now contribute basic attention tokens to Life's Potluck Buffet with John Paulus on YouTube. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening. Okay, let me start with the instruments because there are a couple of instruments that are made of, well, that involve steel, the metal, and are from islands that are, well, very far apart, but that have created all new sounds for the world and just are wonderful instruments. Okay, I'll start with, let's fly in our minds to Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean, now the United States state of Hawaii. Somewhere in maybe the 19th century, Spanish guitars that had been brought to Hawaii started to get played in a new and different way. And a really important figure in the development of this is Joseph Kikuku, who ended up actually touring the United States and elsewhere with his Hawaiian band in the 20th century. And he in the late 19th century, he really was a leader in developing a style of playing the Spanish guitar, but not with fretwork. So you know how the guitars have these things where, there's a board and there's strings on it above it, and you use your, say, left hand if you're right hand. There's like people who play the guitar, like Jimi Hendrix, for example, played kind of left-handed, so to speak. So if you use your right hand to strum the guitar and you use your left hand to do the work on the frets to get the right length of string so that you produce the right pitch that you want to play, that is an old school way of playing a guitar. But in the 19th century, Joseph Kikuku started to play the guitar with using a metal slide instead of his fingers. And what that meant was that the guitar made a completely different kind of sound tone, and there's a what is called portamento in Italian, the kind of wah wah sound to give you a sense of what that is. And if you think of Hawaii and you think of music that you might hear, like if there's a scene, I don't know, from a show about, well, we'll get to that in a second. That is the kind of, you're hearing the steel guitar. If I say, think of a Hawaiian scene and set it to music, the odds are if you're familiar with the odds are you're gonna hear the sound of a steel guitar. It's a very much, I think, associated with tropical islands, especially the islands of Hawaii. Now, a steel guitar has to be tuned differently because if you have a piece of metal that you're running along the strings where the frets are on the guitar, you're going to have to have a kind of tuning that allows you to more easily play a chord by strumming the string. So you have to do what is called open tuning, and that means that when you strum all of the strings together, it's going to be a chord that is not discordant. So if you have a standard tuned guitar that's not open tuned, or a violin or any stringed instrument that's not open tuned, and you run your fingers across it, it's going to make a kind of really discordant sound because it's not tuned to be a harmonically pleasing chord. It's tuned to have the strings related in a different way, and we won't get into that. But nonetheless, so there's open tuning on that, so that makes it easier to, if you're gonna basically be pressing down all the strings at the same time, you want to have an open tune because you can't change the tune of a single string by itself. You can't you're basically changing all of the strings at once because you're holding them down with this metal, nowadays a kind of circular shape, cylinder shaped thing. And that is why those guitars are open tuned. So that's this steel guitar. Another island sound that is absolutely, for me, it takes you to the islands. In this case, is an island in the Caribbean, or two islands, Trinidad and Tobago. And Trinidad and Tobago are really islands of innovation when it comes to music. The whole style of calypso music developed on those islands, coming from traditions in West Africa and developing what we know today as calypso. But in addition to calypso, a whole new instrument was developed on those islands, specifically in an area on the island of Trinidad, and that is the steel pan. You might know it. If you're in the United States, you might call it a steel drum. Sometimes they're referred to as steel drums because they're played like drums and they're made of steel. But steel pan is the kind of name for it in the business. For example, there's a big competition called Panorama. I think that's a pun. And that's the big steel pan band competition that is a really big music festival event as well. So that's the steel pan. It was designed originally out of steel, and it still is out of steel oil drums that are tuned with a hammer. And there's some really good videos out there. You can see there was actually documentary made in 2023 called Sounds of Steel or Sound of Steel. And there's a guy named Jimmy Phillips who is plays the pan, but also is a pan maker, who shows you how to make a steel pan. And that's a really, I'll put that in the description so you can check that out. Okay, here's my idea for that streaming show, and it actually relates to the history of the steel drum, because there is a group was a group called Trinidad All Steel Pan Percussion Orchestra, or TASPO. And TASPO is composed of people who were instrumental, no pun intended, in the development of the steel pan, as we know it. And that includes people who, Tony Williams, for example, who came up with a kind of tuning for steel drums that followed what is called circle of fifths. But again, that's for another time. But nonetheless, the group TASPO really were pioneers. And guess what? The conductor of TASPO was Lieutenant Joseph Nathaniel Griffith, who was a member of the Trinidad Police Band. So that is, I think, a good entree into the treatment for what I'm going to call Island Steel. Okay, Island Steel is a show about a Trinidadian steel pan percussion orchestra leader who is also a detective, plainclothes detective in the Trinidadian police force. And the lieutenant gets visited by a friend who is a Hawaiian steel guitarist from Hawaii and is also in the Honolulu police force. So there is, and when the friend is visiting, stuff goes down and they have to solve crimes together. All right, so that's season 1. Definitely takes place in Port of Spain. Season 2 probably we're in Honolulu for season 2, and so we already got this down. Just need to fill in just a few details. All right, so that's the treatment for Island Steel. I think it's going to be a hit, and let's see what's a hit for our lives by asking the cards. Okay, cards, let's do this. Yellow lemons, blue dumplings, magenta noodles. Cards, tell us some things. Maybe this card will be the first name of the first episode of Island Steel. That's a good idea. Oh, it's this one right here. I think so. Oh, here we go. Okay, here's the first episode of Island Steel. It's entitled, "It's Only Desperation If You Have No Actual Strategy." It's a little long for a title, but anyway, we'll work on it. Let me read you the card. Always act in line with an empowered plan that advances your progress towards your goals. The exact same action can often be viewed as either desperate or strategic, depending on whether it is part of a plan or not. So think about decisions you're making right now, one in particular, and think about what is the desperate thing to do, and then just flip that desperate move on its head, and you'll have an empowered move. So thinking, again, this is one of those things where doing the opposite is going to end up in the right thing to do at the right time. So give that a thought today, and I'll see you tomorrow for the next episode of Island Steel. Oh, that's pretty good.